Alright everyone, it's time to talk about football and occultism, the Occult video 168. We're going to talk a little bit about the Superb Owl, of course, as well, the Super Bowl. Ruminating mostly on football and an interesting theory that I have regarding fortune telling, but also sports in general. On the lowest level, sports occultism is very superstitious, and it's also very evident. In fact, it's a running joke in polite society. Basically, oh, this dude doesn't wash his hat because his team is winning. That dude, before he pitches the ball, he's convinced he has to do a certain physical ritual and mumble a prayer and stuff. And of course, you have even sort of the praying and the genuflecting and everything before games. People have their little idols, their fucking altars, and everything under the sun. It becomes almost like a sort of civic cult. And it's very, very Roman. It's very, very similar to the way in which their horse racing or gladiatorial combat operated, where there's any team sports involved at all. It's very, very similar. You have exactly, apparently, the same civic sense going on at the time. In local communities, in sports nut households or areas that tend to be heavily inclined towards it, you can be shunned for liking the wrong team. You'll be considered an outcast. You know, it's in maybe a joking way, but, you know, you show up wearing the wrong color on the wrong day, you might have a little bit of a problem, and not because the Crips or the Bloods misinterpreted you. So on the surface, it's basically just folk rites. They change over time, and then you have the folk tales, like, oh, you know, that woman's, like, goat that prevented the Boston Red Sox, I think, from winning, or the Cubs or something, and there was, like, supposedly a curse on them, and then they, I guess, sacrificed a goat, or they would let the goat go to the games, and crazy shit like that. That's not necessarily authentic occultism, but it is quite funny. And folk legend definitely ties into the historical side of the occult, so I won't discount that. But that's just the surface. On the second tier, you have the sort of hero and body worship, the very physical side of occultism. You have sort of this, again, Romanesque or Greek, or just classical, antiquated, sort of look at the human ideal. The muscle-bound man, the hero, the champion of his people. It's sort of almost like a yearly miniature epic. It's like a legend and tale is spun from it, even though it's just, ultimately, it's just a highly regulated, very centralized, legalistic game that's understood to just be a game. It goes beyond that in that same sort of mythological sense. Oh, these men will carve their names into the annals of history, and as far as fame is concerned and money, that's very much true. So they definitely do get a boost. Like Tom Brady, according to some memetic systems, is already basically immortal. Like, he's going to be remembered 1,000 years from now because he's a good football player. So that would happen. Or this team made it to the Super Bowl, so they become, you know, part of the legend of that year. It goes beyond that, though, and in a memetic sense, the symbolism of the teams as well. You know, sort of the logos and slogans used matters, the colors used. The Patriots, it evokes, that's the sense that they wish to invoke, of patriotism in, I guess, the American sense. You would have any team represents whatever it represents, like the Cleveland Browns represents residue, because they typically are residue every year. I'm not, it's just a joke, but you understand what I mean. I think at this point, people in Cleveland understand the same thing. You need to change up your ritualism, try something different, try a different variant of magic and see if that helps. Even change like the uniform color, maybe that's the problem. It's the wrong god you're worshiping. And that leads us into the next little thing here, which is that the sports superstition and ritualism really has the same ultimate cause as religion and spirituality, I believe, according to my own theory on the subject, my own hypothesis, as religion did in early man. I've used the example of Urg punched a tree once when he was mad, leaving the cave to go hunt. You know, his woman clubbed him over the head, so he got mad. He punches the tree in half, then goes off to hunt, gets like a woolly rhino. He's like really happy. And then over the subsequent weeks, it starts to trouble Urg a little bit, because he notices every time he's mad and punches a tree, he goes off and gets rhinoceri and mammoths and bears and shit. When he doesn't, he maybe caught a squirrel. And so he decides to test it for himself. Now, if this happens enough times, through sheer chance alone, there will be that one Urg in the world over 1 million years that actually witnesses that over the next dozen or so times, every time he punches the tree experimentally, because he understands basic cause and effect, in a rudimentary sense, like, you know, you eat this mushroom, you die, that sort of stuff, realizes that he does well when he does that. And so it becomes spiritual. Now that's spirituality. It becomes religion when Erg starts killing people for refusing to acknowledge the validity of his tree punching theory. It's a different story entirely. It's why I oppose organized religion and not spirituality, essentially. It's about compulsion versus voluntarism, ultimately. This is the same thing within sports. They don't even have to take it fully seriously, but as long as my team's winning, I think I'm not going to tempt the fates, essentially. And of course, it becomes non-joking for some. Some of them are actually fucking nuts. One thing, though, that I've thought about, in the mimetic sense, is with fortune telling, if you looked back at who won the Super Bowl or who at least was in it, over time, you could take a reading of the subsequent year almost like tarot cards now, couldn't you? You'd say, well, this team winning means a certain thing. That team winning means something else. They're archetypes. You could blend them. You could have, like, whatever teams are there, and then you'd have, like, the major and minor factor, or the 4 teams that almost get there, and then you can arrange them as thus. You could actually develop, I think, a fortune-telling prognostic system for the United States based on that. It's something I've intended to write a book on. But I would need to do far more research. I would have to research American history and also which teams were actually there, margins of victory. That's not usually the sort of stuff I'm interested in because I'm not a sports fan. But I am into the occult, and I am into synchronicity, and if there's synchronicity there, and I suspect there's a possibility that there is based on how people react to certain teams over others winning. Certainly, it would have something to do with the economy of the city that's hosting the game. Certainly, it would affect the place that's sponsoring that team. Like, revenue pours in terms of, like, oh, we sold, 1 million hats. Well, that's a big boost. Certainly, it has an economic and cultural impact on areas. Like, there's a demoralization at the end of the season when a team has won 0 games or has done really poorly. There's a mood lift if they did well. There's certainly one if they win the Super Bowl. Like, if the Patriots win the Super Bowl, I expect a lot of people tomorrow in New England, they'll be hungover, but they'll be a lot happier than normal. That has an effect upon people's actual day-to-day lives, their interactions with one another. People who have bet money, certainly it affects them. It affects the host cities. It affects the whole region. So I think that there may be some sort of impact that it has on a very, very literal, physical level. It's just a matter of attempting to dig into it and see how significant it is and what that specific impact is in totality. So it's something that I do intend to release in the future, a book on football occultism. Both the sort of weird, the folk legends and the ritualism, that sort of side, and the sort of prognostication. So that's a little bit about sports occultism. As you sit down to, eat unhealthy foods while watching people who never eat unhealthy foods unless they're bench pressing over and over and over again and they just need a lot of calories, like say, hey, I got a Big Mac because, I got to burn that 2,000 calories into pure muscle before this fucking game. As you do that, just keep that in mind. There is a little bit of an occultism involved in some people. In the conspiracy sense, of course, I'll say this in closing. They take it a little bit further into like the Illuminati and Bohemian Grove stuff. Like they literally will say it's the superb owl. This was a 4chan joke a couple years ago. It's funny. And that like the halftime show is some sort of ritualism designed to affect the year. Sometimes it does have occult ritualism or trappings in it. Mostly that is a marketing ploy. Like Lady Gaga does that on a day-to-day basis. Some of these, Madonna likes to do it, and all of these people. It would be remiss not to have occult symbolism in your music videos when you know that 1 million extra people will see the music video and click on ads and get you more money. If you just put a pentagram somewhere in the video, knowing that it'll get spread around on the weird side of YouTube instead of just being a standard music video, wouldn't that be beneficial? Of course it would. You want the attention. You want the name recognition. So some of that is a mock-up. You've got to understand real occultist time here as opposed to maybe tinfoil land. That's not real occultism. You can take it that way. It has the same symbolism, but it's not meant to actually work on anything except for your wallet. So keep that in mind. It's where the ritualism is not evident immediately. And where there's a psychological projection instead, that's the real occultism. That's about all. Peace out.